Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Joe Szimhart. We talked a couple years ago about his excellent book titled Santa Fe, Bill Tate and Me, and I actually just reposted it last month, and a lot of people listened to that, much more so than when we first did the interview. But I came across his name. I was looking through. This is actually the second guest that I've gotten from looking through the Jolyon West archives. His name popped up. I said, hey, I interviewed Joe Szimhart. Why is he in the Jolyon West files? And the same thing happened when I talked to Carl Raschke. I interviewed Carl Raschke about his book, Painted Black. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to Joe and said, hey, your name is in here. And he said, oh, yeah, I knew and met Jolyon West. So I asked him to come in and talk about that. But he also has another book, Mushroom Satori. Both of his books have excellent reviews on Amazon, by the way. And he also has a YouTube channel, which we're going to talk a little bit about because I saw some of the discussions that he had and I'm interested in it. But we're going to talk about Jolyon West and Joe's background. So Joe Szimhart, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, William.
Joe, for people who may not have heard our earlier conversation, which I will link to in this once this is done, can you kind of do your background and how you became a cult interventionist and what led you to working with and knowing Jolyon West?
All right, briefly, I got involved in looking at the alternative universe back in the late 60s, like most of our generation did back then, experimenting with, psychedelics or entheogens and all that. The consciousness revolution started with a lot of new cults, especially from the East, India and Japan coming. People were dropping drug use and doing meditation, doing yoga, and all of that. That was a big change in the early 1970s. My journey led from college into art school, and I was, wanting to become a professional artist. When I was studying the modern artists, I noticed that they had often gotten into something called theosophy or occultism from the 19th century, the early 20th. And so I began exploring all of that, like the works of William Blake. And it led me to the works of Manly P. Hall, Madame Blavatsky, and a number of other groups. And I moved to Santa Fe in 1975. I got in contact with the I Am activity, which was a 1930s neo-fascist, well, it's actually a fascist organization based on theosophy and channeling ascended masters. And they believed in very right-wing attitudes and, supported anti-liberal causes back then. So I was attracted to the conservatism, let me put it that way, after being a quasi-hippie for a while. And then a group called Church Universal and Triumphant came across my path through friends, and they were an offshoot of the I Am activity. Church Universal and Triumphant was founded in 1958 by a guy named Mark Prophet. His wife, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, took over the group when he died in 1973. And I came across them around 1975 and began studying their teachings in 1978, 79. I got caught up in it. I went to several conferences out in Malibu in California with 3,000 or 4,000 other people. The group had around maybe 15,000, 20,000 members at the time. I got caught up in it in the whole activity, and I bailed out of it after a lot of conflicts in 1980. I began studying what the hell happened to me. What is all this about? Why was I so taken up with this nonsense of communicating with ascended masters and doing chanting or what's called positive thinking and affirmations and in Christianity it's a name it and claim it Christians. If you claim something in the name of Jesus, he's going to bring it about. If you believe it in full faith. And a lot of that kind of theosophy was based on a similar premise that you can magically transform things by invoking God or masters or whatever. So I got in touch with people that were ex-members of the group. I got known for exposing the group. I got in touch with the Cult Awareness Network at the time, and I began to work with exit counselors and deprogrammers around 1985, 1986, and made a career out of doing cult interventions internationally for about 12 years. And I did it part-time since 1998. until now. I'm still involved in doing some interventions, but I work at a psychiatric hospital for the past 22 years. And I have other things in my life that take up a lot of time. So, but I still do a lot of research in this cult business. I met a lot of interesting people. Louis Jolyon West was one of them. Dr. Margaret Thayer Singer introduced me to him, about him in 1982 when I met her at her house. She and Jolly West were involved in government research into mind control in the 50s, especially, what had happened to Korean American soldiers captive in Korea. So West was able to deconstruct what happened to them. There was no magical trickery of mind control going on that caused these soldiers to, renounce the United States and praise their captors. The main reason for that was just basically something very cheap and easy to do, which is sleep deprivation for weeks. You can drive people crazy and get them to say almost anything if they can't think correctly and just want to get some sleep.
Right. So you met him, which at Singer's house, was it in California?
I met Dr. Singer in Berkeley in California in 1982. I met Dr. West for the first time, and it was in his office at UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. And I think we were meeting over some court cases that were going on regarding Church Universal and Triumphant. And I was a outspoken ex-member at the time, and they were picking my brain. But that's when I first met him. And then I met him again at conferences where he would lecture at Cult Awareness Network conferences. And he asked me to work with 2 cases that he had. One was in Scotland, another one was in California. And I could describe them a little more thoroughly if you want, but I was
Absolutely.
Sort of interventionist on those cases. Yeah.
But what was he like in person when you met him? I mean, I think he got tenure at the University of Oklahoma when he was 29. So he was a very brilliant guy, right?
He was brilliant. He grew up poor. He got into the Air Force services. He got his MD in psychiatry early in his life. He got known by the government for his expertise, and he helped with that Korean debacle in analyzing what happened back in the 50s. He got a grant in the 50s when the government was doing research on LSD and psychotropic drugs and other things to see how they could affect the human mind, when he was at the University of Oklahoma. And that brought him into this whole area of linked up with MK Ultra and the CIA and all of that stuff. It's a lot of hype and drama. I mean, what he was doing was considered science at the time, although we look back on it and there was a lot of mistakes being made, of course, because it was early in that research.
Right. And I mean, he comes across as kind of a big guy, like he's wearing plaid here. What was he like in person, like talking to him?
He was tall. He was maybe 6'4". I don't know, 6'3", something like that. He was a big guy. The last I remember him, I was at his house. It was toward the 1990, maybe. We were working on a case with a few other people, and he invited us there for dinner, and his wife was there. She was very gracious, Catherine. I'm not sure if I met one of his children, but anyway, he liked conversation. He was very amiable. That particular case I was working on, he was an expert, I believe, in a court case regarding a young woman who was allegedly abusing her kid. She was in a Bible sect, Christian sect that encouraged corporal punishment on children, and her child was about 2 and was seemed traumatized to the people that were involved in that case, and she was on trial for child custody, I think. So West convinced the court to have her go through exit counseling, and I was brought in with a couple of other people to talk to her for a week about her beliefs and how the influence worked in her situation. He did all this on his own because he cared for her very much. He didn't have to. So we had lots of conversations at dinner. What was interesting about him is, like most people toward the end of their lives, they're thinking more deeply about the final things. What is God? What's the meaning of life? And we had conversations at that depth. He basically was a deist in his perceptions of theological reality, and the deism basically means that, they call it the clockmaker God, the one that some original source of being puts the universe into motion and then kind of lets it go according to certain basic laws and fundamentals. And it may look like chaos to us, but perhaps it's something else that's going on out there that we can't fathom. But in any case, the universe is kind of free to run on its own with this ground of being behind it, and it doesn't interact like the Christian God, which people believe interacts with us through the Holy Spirit, on a daily basis.
Right. So he kind of was semi-agnostic, deist. That was common too. A lot of people who started the U.S. were deists as well.
Certainly. A lot of our founding fathers were deists, and they were universalists. There were different belief systems going on. Freemasons. I think there was only one Catholic in the mix. Yeah.
And Margaret Singer was also kind of involved in that whole circus. So Jolyon West was a Scientology critic, and also involved in CAN, which Scientology sued and ended up owning, right? Can you talk about what that environment, were you familiar with what those happenings with the
Oh, yeah, it certainly was. West, along with psychiatrists, were considered the most evil people in the universe, according to Scientology. And West was number one on their list. So he was a big target. They really hated him. And he didn't stand down like a lot of other professionals did that were afraid of lawsuits from Scientology. He never stood down. And he spoke openly and critically about the group, which I, admired him for. The Cult Awareness Network ran into trouble in the early 90s when a case came up regarding a deprogrammer, exit counselor, Rick Ross. He had involuntarily deprogrammed a minor, which was legal. You could hold them against their will if the parents wanted to keep them in the house, from a Bible Christian type of cult. Were very controlling. And then they wanted to get the older brother out, who just had turned 18, so that when they brought him in, of course, it was against the law to hold him against his will. He went back to the group. The deprogram didn't work. There was a trial. Rick was acquitted, but then Scientology got the case and ran a civil suit against Ross and the Cult Awareness Network, claiming that Ross got the information to do the case from a Cult Awareness Network member, I think via Canada somewhere. And the Cult Awareness Network at the time wasn't well funded. They weren't well defended. Scientology ran the case and they won it in court. The Cult Awareness Network went bankrupt around 1995 because of this. In 1996, they had to sell all their assets. The only bidder that bid anything was a Scientology operative, and they bought everything, all the archives and the name. So today, if you dial that number that comes up, Cult Awareness Network, you are going to get a Scientologist, and they will take all your information. So that's been going on for quite a while. I was deposed by Scientology's lawyer for that case. They deposed me in Philadelphia. Kendrick Moxon was one of their main lawyers, and I spent about 8 hours, being hammered with questions, with formal setting in a hotel conference room, and there was a stenographer there. They were trying to pick my brain as to me giving kickbacks from my deprogramming cases to the Cult Awareness Network. I did donate money to them over the years for their ex-member fund, but it wasn't that much. So I had a lot of fun talking to the Scientology lawyer for 8 hours.
So you got drawn into it as well.
Yeah.
So they thought they were going to try to get evidence from you that there was something kind of scurrilous going on with CAN. Is that why you think they deposed you?
Yes. Yeah. They wanted to get evidence. I didn't get called on the witness stand. I don't think they wanted me there. In any case, they were looking for any evidence to prove that CAN had a history of referring people to illegal deprogramming interventions. That's what they wanted to do.
And do you mind talking more about the two cases that Jolyon West recommended to you, the one in Scotland and the one here in the States?
Yeah, the one in Scotland, the cult involved was headed by a Muslim Sufi type of character named Sheikh Nazim. Now, Nazim had a following pretty strong in the West somewhat. His group, and he was responsible for recruiting Cat Stevens early in his career when Stevens went off the rock and roll circuit and became this, Muslim and stopped performing for quite a while. He only recently, in the last 7-10 years, maybe started performing again. But yeah, that particular Muslim cult, I'll call it, was very shrewd in the way it recruited people. So they targeted this young man in Scotland when he was in London, and this was in the papers in the London Telegraph. So I'm not telling anything confidential here. It was all exposed, especially a year later. Lord Viscount Rehaven, and he was wealthy. He was involved in the rock scene, promoting music, and so one of the main operatives under Nazim, Sheikh Nazim, is Muhammad Ali, I guess is his name, part of his name. He targeted this young man and got him involved in Islam and the group, and I mean, the young man was kind of naive. I mean, that's just the way he was. He wasn't a great intellect, let me put it that way, and he was easy to recruit apparently. And they took total control of him. They even had a one-on-one person with him, managing him and all his affairs, going to the bank with him, getting major withdrawals, having him sign checks to the group, that kind of thing. And so the father got suspicious of it, Lord Seafield, and he hired a major PI firm in London, and these guys were top rate, and they brought Jolly West in to help exit counsel this young man after they had spirited him away from his home by some trickery. He actually went willingly with somebody he thought was a Muslim. The guy wasn't. He looked a little Muslim, but because he was a little swarthy skinned. And they took him to this place in a peninsula of Knoydart across from Mallaig in northern Scotland. And Jolly spent some time with the young man there, and it wasn't getting very far, apparently. So he got in touch with me and a couple of other exit counselors, and we flew over there to try to see what we could do with the young man and talk to him. And so I kind of semi-led that effort. We met with Jolly West in London. He briefed us on the case, and I went up to Knoydart. We had to get there by boat. There was no other way across from Mallaig. It was quite isolated. It was a small hunting village. Very, very pretty place. A great tavern where you could get the finest single malt whiskeys right nearby where we were working. And so we had a decent week with this young nobleman. He listened to us. He eventually did leave the group, not immediately, but the group stayed away from him after that point because they realized that this whole effort to get him out was going to expose Nazim even more, because I spoke out about him publicly in the paper. And well, anyway, a year later, they interviewed the young lord, and he was happy that the whole event had happened. The intervention was successful, and he denounced what Nazim had done to him. So that was that case. It was very interesting. It was kind of a fun, different type of situation to be in. The other one, like I mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but how did Jolyon West get that case? How did he find out about it to get you involved?
Well, Lord Seafield, obviously a very wealthy man, and he wanted to get the best in terms of what mind control was about, and he was told about Jolly West's research in that field and his fame. And so he went right to the top and talked to him personally and convinced him to fly over there.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and was that the same as this case you're about to talk about in the States too? Is that somebody contacted West who then contacted you?
That was different, as I recall, because my memory isn't clear on this. But West was involved in a court case with this young woman who was accused of child abuse, and they were going to maybe take her child away from her. And the child abuse resulted because of the sect she was in, this Christian Bible sect that believed in corporal punishment. And, she'd slap the child or hit the child's hand. And whenever it did anything she didn't want it to do as a corrective. And that was like dozens and dozens of times daily, because this is how the group operated. So West convinced the court to, rather than immediately take the child from her, have her go through some exit counseling and see if she could renounce the group and get some therapy and begin to adjust in her parenting skills. So I flew into California with a couple of other people that did exit counseling, and we tried to work with this young woman for about a week. And what was interesting, when I first met her, her child was still in the room, because they had a nanny to take care of her while we were working with this woman. And I went to wave hello to the little girl. As soon as I raised my hand to wave hello, she shrunk back, and I knew immediately this kid had been traumatized, because just the wave of the hand looked like punishment to her. Yeah.
And so how did that get worked out? Was there a positive outcome like the other case?
I don't think so. She held on to her beliefs as I left that case. I don't know what happened. I didn't do any follow-up afterwards. I didn't hear. So I don't think it turned out very well. I believe she had to be monitored by Children and Youth Services for quite some time after that. I don't know if they took the child away, but it was vague in terms of how it ended up. I'm not sure we had much effect on her in dissuading her from her beliefs.
And had you heard of other stories of West farming out kind of cult interventionist things other than you? Was he central in a lot of those things? Like
No, that was very rare for him to get involved that way. In fact, that's the only two cases I know of where he did that kind of intervention, and the one in Scotland is the only one I know where he went in physically, personally, to work with somebody like that. And ex-members would come to meet him, but he never, as far as I knew, had a practice of doing an intervention with someone that was a true believer, especially someone in the beginning that wouldn't want to talk to him.
And he was on kind of the West would travel around and go to lots of conferences talking about cults and things like that too. So were you aware of him at that time? Yeah, doing that stuff.
Yeah, he would show up at American Family at the AFF conferences. Yeah, and Cult Awareness Network conferences. I heard him lecture once, correcting his diagnosis of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, who he considered schizophrenic earlier in his career. And he adjusted that to coming out with antisocial personality disorder for Hubbard. And he described in a paper why he came up with that, what evidence he had for that. And that was interesting to hear him talk about that. So he wasn't afraid to criticize Hubbard and Scientology. In fact, I don't think any cult out there intimidated him.
Didn't he become fair game? Didn't Scientology put him on some list or something? I thought maybe that was the case. Did you ever?
Yeah, he would have been fair game. He would have been. There was a lot of disinformation spread about him. For instance, Scientology made a big deal out of him allegedly killing an elephant by overdosing on LSD back in the 50s. And the real story is that they did experiment on this elephant named Tusco. Yeah, Tusco, right. There were many elephants named Tusco, but this one was a particular Indian male elephant, I believe in Oklahoma. And the mistake they made were two mistakes. They dosed it thousands of times more than a human being should take to trip on LSD. they didn't take into account that the size of the brain is what matters, not the size of the body. And so the elephant had seizures apparently, and then they tried to use some drugs to bring the elephant down. For instance, Thorazine would be used in some cases to help people get off of a bad LSD trip. I've seen that happen in the psych hospital where I work, for instance. Sometimes people come in on these psychedelics, and there's certain drugs that are very helpful in settling somebody down, and that was one of them. But it's a low dose they give people. So I don't remember what they gave the elephant, but some scientists believe that it was the recovery meds that killed the elephant more so than the LSD. And who knows what other factors were involved. There's a doctor that later dosed 2 elephants with LSD with similar doses, and neither of those elephants showed any more than some anxiety for a few hours. They weren't injured by those high doses. So there could have been something that affected that particular elephant.
Do you know why they selected an elephant? Like what did they, why was it an elephant, not a house cat or a dog?
There was some disorder that the elephant had that they wanted to, it might have been angry, or I don't know what. They wanted to see if they could change its consciousness the way, some human beings, we've known this for a long time, and there's new research being done. A dose of LSD of 250 micrograms or 500, which can cause an 8-hour trip, has helped people overcome addictions, depression, melancholia, a number of factors. You have to be careful, though, who is a good candidate for that kind of therapy, because some people can end up becoming more psychotic after taking an entheogen like that, or that type of a psychedelic drug. So there's a lot more careful science behind that. But yeah, like even Bobby Kennedy's wife, who was mentally ill, depressed, did LSD therapy in the 50s, and it helped her for a year. He was very impressed with the results from that session. So yeah, it has benefits, but the unknowns are just too vast to give it out randomly to people like hippies were taking, for instance.
Right. The consequences are all different. There's a wide kind of spectrum of, like, some people does bad things and some people have mind.
Well, I used it back in the 60s, LSD and a few other psychedelic drugs, maybe half a dozen times total. I got bored with them about the 3rd or 4th time I tried that, and because the first time it was exciting. You get into all this bells and whistles of consciousness, and one with God and one with the universe, all that stuff comes up, and but the more you take it, like Houston Smith says in his book on entheogens, they have like a half-life for the average person. You don't get that kick anymore, that insight, and after a while you begin wondering, why am I even doing this? And I stopped it because of that reason. I got bored with it. And I thought, well, maybe it also can affect me adversely, so I didn't see any reason to use it anymore. And I haven't, not since 1973.
But that was the era. There are tons of.
That was the era, yeah, the late 60s to the early 70s. And back in that day, early in the Silicon Valley thing, these guys that were into computer programming were microdosing on LSD, and they thought it helped them. And
they still are.
Apparently they still are. Yeah, the microdosing crowd. I think a lot of it's placebo effect. They believe it's going to work, and it works. LSD, like any kind of mind-altering drug like that, can loosen up your synapses and the way you perceive things for a while, and give you some new insight into how to look at something. So, it might be good for some creative people. I don't believe in it myself.
Did you ever hear of Jolyon West being in Haight-Ashbury and being involved in kind of drugs or helping people? I think there were lots of drugs at Haight-Ashbury. Mm-hmm. So that free clinic that he was associated with saw tons of troubled people who were overdosed or whatever. Did you ever hear anything about that?
I have, and I read about it. He didn't talk about it much. He was a very caring individual. He's deeply involved in the civil rights movement. protests.
He was friends with Charlton Heston too. Like,
yes, he was.
Yeah,
back in the day. Yeah, it was interesting because Charlton Heston had turned into like a right-wing gun right kind of a person. But yeah, back then they were, quite close. In fact, he was known to Governor Reagan West, and Reagan got him involved in a project in California, and it was written up in this book, Journey into Madness, the true story of secret CIA mind control and medical abuse by Gordon Thomas. Yeah. And in that book, I have it open here, but just to be accurate, Reagan wanted to see what they could do in 1974 with some of these problems people were having about violence and all of that. And so he hired Jolly West to look into this while he was at the Neuropsychiatric Institute in UCLA. And so West had proposed to the governor the creation of a financially well-endowed multidisciplinary center for the study and reduction of violence. Within its confines, doctors would explore all types of violent behavior, what caused it, and how it could be detected and prevented and treated. So they were going to do these laboratory type things, maybe even put implants in people to monitor, their behavior or their feelings, and do interventions to help reduce violence. I don't think it came to anything because it was a little too adventurous, but
it was on the table.
It was on the table. They were going to possibly concentrate on the pharmacology of violence and the best way to use anti-violence inhibiting drugs. That was one of the things they were looking at. So, you see that effort, for instance, in Brave New World with Huxley, the Soma drug, to make everybody feel okay about being in a totalist community and overcome depression. So everybody took Soma. In a way,
they're kind of taking it today with Prozac.
Well, we take all kinds of stuff today, and now it's medical marijuana. That's become the universal Soma now.
Good point. Yeah, very true. Yeah. And you kind of go into some stuff. I was looking over your. Is there anything you'd like to add before we kind of move on to your YouTube channel? What's your kind of final take on West, or what's your thought about him? You meeting him and knowing him.
Yeah, he was impressive. I met him one time before I went to Scotland. Let me think. Anyway, Dr. Singer and him were in the same room, and I had walked in, and they were having this discussion about the old days. And I wish I could have heard a lot more about that, because they, that's the kind of stuff that books are made out of. What went on back when the government hired these people to research mind control and all of that stuff. There was. They were both quite impressive. West, I thought at the end when I knew him, he was a very kind-hearted man, intellectually curious about a lot of things. His end of life in cancer, they said he died of cancer, but I heard his son wrote later on to clarify that West had chosen to die, and his son assisted him, and so he took some medications that was like an overdose because he knew he was dying anyway of cancer, so he made that choice.
Right. I think his son actually wrote a book about it. Yeah.
Yes, he did. It was in 1999 that he passed away.
Do you mind taking a few questions and then we can cover some of the inquiry? Sure. Joker asked, what would you recommend for a born-in or second-generation survivor looking for assistance to like a cult or a coercive environment?
Yeah, the International Occultic Studies Association has conferences and also links on their website to second-generation recovery sites and people and books. So if you go to icsahome.com, ICSA home, HOME.com, and look for SGAs or second generation survivors of cults, you'll find information there. I think that might be the best start. They can, you can stretch out from there, but also just put in second generation cult recovery, and you'll see there's certain people that have started their own podcasts or websites, and it'll come up as far as linking into communities out there on the internet that are dealing with that problem.
Gotcha. And Carl asked, do you have any contact with Ted Patrick or Alexander Jr. in the 70s?
I did. I met Ted Patrick once at a Cult Awareness Network conference. We just talked about a case that I had worked on, and it didn't work out. And then the mother told me that she was going to call in Ted Patrick with all his people, and that never happened. Ted said he never did it because she didn't have any money. Yeah, I never worked with Ted. I knew people that did work with him that became exit counselors or deprogrammers later. His techniques I didn't agree with. I know he probably helped a lot of people, but I think he became a legend in his own mind, and he wanted to, do a lot of media contact in order to stop the cult problem. Sort of grandiose about the whole thing. So in a sense, he became a hero to some people, and other people avoided him like the plague in the exit counseling field. And then as far as Alexander Jr., he, I think, was an offshoot of Ted Patrick, and he started his own deprogramming teams. He also set up a recovery center in Arizona. And I met quite a few people that had worked with Alexander and his son, and had been to the recovery center, and they later became exit counselors. One of them, rather infamous, Mark Bloxham, got into quite a lot of trouble because he couldn't control his addiction problem while he was a deprogrammer. And I worked on some cases with him. So I learned about Alexander through Mark Bloxham and others that worked with him on cases. When I was working with Mark a little bit, I worked on a handful of cases with him back in the 80s.
Interesting. And Jolly asks, what's your opinion of Steve Hassan and his bite model? Any thoughts?
Well, that bite model, it came out in 1988 in his book, Combating Cult Mind Control, and it's helped a lot of people, even people that are critical of Steve, thought the book was good, that I knew. I know Steve quite well. I admire his work. Some of his ideas are a bit controversial in the social science field because of maybe the way he did his research, but he's a pioneer in a sense in the field of exit counseling. He has stretched into politics now. He wrote that book, The Cult of Trump, which is fairly well researched. I did a review on it. A lot of the points he makes in there are accurate. And he continues to, pursue his career. He got his PhD within the past 2 years. And, he's been a force in this field, one of those names, controversial to some and very helpful and needed to others. His bite model works. There's lots of models of what mind control is. And as long as it's applicable and a pragmatic approach, there's a host of models that can help people understand mind control. For instance, Robert J. Lifton's 8 themes of what constitutes totalistic thought reform have been very helpful, and Hassan refers to that. There's Margaret Singer's 8 or 6 themes. Dr. Janya Lalich has a 4-part scheme, and I use a 4-part scheme, also a model that helps my clients understand what I mean and when I lecture. So yeah, there's lots of models. Hassan's bite model might be one of the most well known.
Interesting. And let's see what else we got here. Carl mentions chapter 22 of Lifton's book, and you've done a lot of stuff on the YouTube. You've kind of have a lot of subjects there. I'll put a link to your YouTube channel so people can look. But you kind of got into the occulture. Can you kind of talk about why you had that series on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, I named it Cults in the Occulture. And the reason I did that is there's a lot of confusion about both the word cult and the word occult. And in fact, I just did a lecture on the occulture for the last International Cultic Studies Association conference, and that can be available, I think, through their website. So occult culture is just basically anything to do with, witchcraft, fortune telling, astrology, the belief that if you knock on wood, that it'll take care of what you just said. And it goes into religion. Every religion has an element of the occult and a cult within it. They can't thrive without it. And I'm using these terms in a neutral sense. Culture just means hidden wisdom or hidden powers or something that's hidden from the human senses. And religion primarily deals with things that are hidden from the human senses, beyond the social good they do, which is not hidden, but then the worship of a god or a deity, using prayers that somehow interact with this deity. I mean, that's all occult, that's hidden. And it's based on belief, not on scientific testing that our senses can pick up. The same thing with cults. The most ancient cults may have been tree cults. Cultures had a sacred tree. And you see the story in Genesis might be reflective of the ancient tree cults, because these trees had significant meaning to that early form of man that we call Adam and Eve. And that story got passed on. So there were bear cults, where hunters in Neanderthal times or whenever would hang a bear claw on their neck to carry some of the sympathetic magic or power associated with bear power. Catholics, I grew up Catholic. The core cult in Catholicism is the Eucharist, is the Holy Communion, is what's called Thanksgiving. Eucharist is Thanksgiving for the body and blood of Christ being shared among the body of Christ on earth. And it's done mystically through something called transubstantiation. But without that cult, Catholicism cannot exist. So what happens when I lecture, the problem with cults and the occulture is when use of those ideas become self-sealing social systems, where there's a strong us and them variable, and there's a strong belief in some kind of transcendent attraction, where there's an authority figure that interprets all this for everybody. People become circular in their thinking. It's called orbiting around the central idea 24/7. It's something they think about when they wake up, when they go to bed, they go to meetings during the week. And this is the key to, and it's Lifton's key too. His final theme is dispensing of existence. And I call it exit perils, meaning to get out, things are going to get dangerous for you. You're going to lose your soul. You're going to lose your salvation. You're going to go insane. You're going to betray the group, and they could retaliate against you. You will lose your investment. If you leave the group, the person you're married to might divorce you. There's all these exit pearls once you end up in a self-sealing social system. And that more or less defines what a harmful cult is how they define who is allowed in and who is allowed out.
That's a lot. That's a lot of groups. I mean, the scary thing
all groups to some extent participate in that. Like Lifton said, this is a matter of degree. You get a group like Charlie Manson, and the degree of intensity and ending up in violence and control that he had is a lot more than your average local church, or your average Al's club or whatever. Even though all of those groups, whether it's a church, has an inside and an outside. They have rules of engagement. They have, but a healthy group, a healthy cult, if you will, allows people to exit graciously. They're not going to condemn them. They wish they would stay, but there's no threat on their soul or their life, so to speak. There shouldn't be. A person in a free society should be allowed to make a free choice to leave their religion.
Agreed. So I'll put a link to your YouTube channel and then your book, our other discussion about your book, and a link to the book. Is there anything you'd like to add, Joe, or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Yeah, this is a vast topic. If you get into it, be careful, because there's a lot of rabbit holes. So I've helped people get out of those rabbit holes. over the years. I myself went in and out of them. And, Mircea Eliade, the great scholar on religions, who's controversial in his own way because he was quite right wing. He called it ordeal by labyrinth, his study of religions, world religions, because you had to, if you look at the myth of the labyrinth in ancient Greek, Theseus, who went down there, he had this thread, Ariadne's thread, to help him come back out of the labyrinth. So you need to have a safe way out of the rabbit hole, know how to get back out of the cave if you're going to go in one. Otherwise, you might get stuck there for quite a long time. And that's the idea. So basically what that is that you maintain some skepticism, in my view, a form of pragmatism where everything is up for question, even my own beliefs. So that I think is a safety factor.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it. The Ariadne's thread to get out of the labyrinth, because there's so many of these groups and cultures. So there's a lot of coercion and
a lot of heavy influence. It's like the idea of the big lie. If you tell it often enough, people start believing in some of it, at least.
I mean, you can put it in political groups, all kinds. I don't care what's part of the spectrum it is, left, right, whatever. Has had some element of us against them, and those levels of degree that Lifton talked about. But Joe, thanks again. Thanks so much for your time. It's great to talk with you again. And I'll put links to the YouTube. Do you have the social media or anything, or a way people can contact you if you're interested?
I have a Twitter. They can contact me through email. I have a Twitter account, #JZimhart. And my email is, again, jszimhart@gmail.com.
People want to reach out. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time. I
No
really
problem.
appreciate it. All right.
Good. Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. You too. Stay there.